Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the mining ship New Dawn, staring at the massive object floating in the darkness ahead. After 12 years of mining operations in deep space, he had seen plenty of strange things, but nothing like this. The ship was unlike anything humans had ever built. It was smooth and curved, almost like it was grown rather than constructed. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "How big is that thing?" asked Lisa Park, the chief engineer. She was a small woman with short black hair, but everyone on the crew knew she was the smartest person on the ship. "About 3 times the size of our vessel," replied Ryan Cole from the communications station. "And Captain, I'm picking up some kind of signal. It's not like anything in our databases." Jake felt his heart racing. This was it. First contact with an alien species. Every human alive had dreamed of this moment. He took a deep breath and tried to sound calm. "Open a channel, Ryan. Let's try to talk to them." For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the alien ship began to move closer. Jake could see his crew getting nervous. Security Chief Carlos Bennett had his hand on his weapon, and Dr. Amanda Hayes was checking her medical supplies for the 3rd time. Suddenly, the main screen flickered to life. A creature appeared before them, and several crew members gasped. It was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer. Its eyes were large and black, and it had no visible mouth. When it spoke, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Greetings, small beings. I am Nexus Prime of the Vorthak Empire. We have been watching your species with great interest." Jake stepped forward. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel New Dawn. We come in peace and friendship." "Peace," the alien repeated, and Jake could swear he heard something like amusement in its voice. "Yes, we too seek peace. We would like to learn about your kind. Perhaps some of your crew would visit our ship for cultural exchange." Dr. Hayes immediately volunteered, along with Tony Martinez, a young engineer who had always been fascinated by alien life. Jake felt uneasy, but couldn't explain why. This was what they had trained for, what humanity had prepared for. First contact protocols. Required cooperation and openness. "We would be honored," Jake replied. The next day, Dr. Hayes and Tony Martinez were transported to the alien vessel. When they returned 6 hours later, they seemed different. Hayes was quiet and kept touching her neck. Tony looked pale and tired. "How did it go?" Jake asked. "Fascinating," Hayes replied, but her voice sounded flat. "They're very interested in human biology. They want to understand how we work." Over the next week, more crew members visited the Vorthak ship. Each time, they came back changed. They were tired, distant, and many complained of headaches. Some had small marks on their arms or necks that they claimed were from medical scanning devices. Lisa Park was the first to voice her concerns. "Something's not right, Captain. Look at Tony. He used to be the happiest guy on the ship. Now he barely speaks." Jake had noticed it too. Tony Martinez, who used to joke and laugh with everyone, now sat alone in the corner during meals. His eyes had a haunted look that reminded Jake of soldiers he had known who had seen too much combat. "They say the procedures are necessary for understanding," Tony whispered when Jake asked him about it. "They need to know how we feel pain, how we heal, how we think. It's for science." "What kind of procedures?" Jake demanded. Tony's hands started shaking. "I can't. They said not to talk about it. They said it would interfere with the research." Dr. Hayes was no better. She had stopped eating properly and spent most of her time staring out the windows. When Jake tried to talk to her, she would only say that the Vorthak were very thorough in their methods. Carlos Bennett, the security chief, came to Jake's quarters late one night. "Captain, I think we need to leave. Now." "What are you talking about?" "I've been watching the alien ship. They have other vessels joining them, bigger ones. And I've been monitoring our people when they come back from their visits. They're not just tired, Captain. They're terrified." Jake wanted to dismiss Carlos's concerns, but he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. His crew was falling apart. People who had been friends for years now avoided each other. The ship felt cold and quiet, like a tomb. The truth began to emerge when Ryan Cole accidentally intercepted a partial transmission between the Vorthak ships. The universal translator could only handle fragments, but what it revealed made Jake's blood run cold. Subjects show excellent pain tolerance. Psychological breaking point reached after. Useful for weapon development. Earth location confirmed. Harvest operation approved. Jake gathered his senior staff in his quarters. Lisa Park, Carlos Bennett, and Ryan Cole sat around the small table, their faces grim. "They're not studying us for science," Jake said quietly. "They're testing us like laboratory animals." "The pain tolerance tests," Lisa whispered. "They're trying to figure out how much we can take before we break." Carlos nodded. "And they're planning something bigger. That transmission mentioned Earth." Jake felt sick. They had welcomed these aliens as friends, and instead they had walked into a trap. His crew had been tortured while he stood by and did nothing. Good people like Tony Martinez and Dr. Hayes had been hurt because he had trusted too easily. "We need to warn Earth," Jake said. "And we need to get our people back." "How?" Ryan asked. "Their ship is 10 times more powerful than ours." "I don't know yet," Jake replied. "But we're going to find a way." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He walked through the corridors of his ship looking at his crew. These were good people, miners, engineers, scientists. They had signed up to dig rocks and explore space, not to be test subjects for alien monsters. He stopped at Tony Martinez's quarters and looked through the small window. The young man was sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. Even from a distance, Jake could see the small scars on his arms and neck. Tony had always been like a son to him, full of life and dreams. Now he looked broken. Jake made a promise to himself and to his crew. Somehow, he would make the Vorthak pay for what they had done. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way. Humans might be smaller and weaker than these aliens, but they had something the Vorthak clearly didn't understand. They had each other. And when you hurt one human, you made enemies of them all. The next morning, Jake began making plans. The Vorthak thought they were studying weak prey. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Humanity was about to show them what happened when you mistake kindness for weakness and curiosity for vulnerability. The war was about to begin, and the aliens had no idea what they had unleashed. Lisa Park's fingers flew across the communications panel as alarms blared throughout the new dawn. The Vorthak ships were moving closer, and she knew this might be their last chance to warn Earth. Captain Jake Morrison stood behind her, his face grim as he watched the alien vessels surround them. "Got it," Lisa whispered. "Emergency transmission sent. Earth will know what happened here." The transmission lasted only 30 seconds before the Vorthak jammed their communications. In those precious moments, Lisa had managed to send everything. They had learned about the aliens and their true intentions. She prayed it would be enough. Back on Earth, Admiral Catherine Stone read the desperate message in her office at United Earth Defense Headquarters. The words made her blood run cold. She immediately called General Patrick Webb into her office. "Read this," she said, handing him the decoded transmission. Patrick's face went pale as he read. "Torture? Experiments? They're planning to harvest Earth? That's what Captain Morrison believes. And look at this data about their ship capabilities. We're dealing with something far beyond our current technology." Within hours, emergency meetings were called across all Earth governments. While politicians argued about diplomatic solutions, Catherine and Patrick began secretly preparing Earth's defenses. They both knew that if the Vorthak were willing to torture innocent miners, diplomacy was already dead. Meanwhile, across human space, the nightmare was spreading. Mars Base 7 went silent first. The base housed 3,000 colonists, including families with children. When the relief ship arrived a week later, they found nothing but empty buildings and signs of struggle. Danny Foster was one of the few survivors. He had been outside the main colony when the Vorthak attacked, fixing a communications array. He watched from hiding as strange ships landed and alien creatures herded his friends and neighbors into large metal containers. They took everyone, Danny reported when he finally reached safety. Men, women, children, they didn't care, they just loaded them up like cargo. Nicole Gray, the colony administrator, had escaped by hiding in the underground storage tunnels. Her report was even more disturbing. I saw them scanning people first. They seemed to be looking for specific things. Age, health, genetic markers maybe. They were very organized about it. Europa Station was next. Then the mining colony on Ceres. Each time the pattern was the same. The Vorthak would arrive without warning, take most of the humans, and leave the facilities empty. The few who escaped all told similar stories of cold, efficient abduction operations. Dr. Helen Cross, Earth's leading expert on alien biology, studied every piece of data they could gather. Working in her laboratory deep beneath Geneva, she made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. They're not just randomly experimenting, she told Admiral Stone during a secure video call. Based on the survivor reports and the limited biological samples we've recovered, I believe they're trying to understand human pain responses at a neurological level. Why would they want to know that? To weaponize it. If you understand exactly how a species experiences pain and fear, you can create targeted biological weapons that cause maximum suffering. They're not just torturing humans for research. They're developing tools to make torture more effective. The revelation sparked something dark in Admiral Stone. These aliens weren't just enemies. They were monsters who turned suffering into science. Underground resistance movements began forming across human space. Luke Barnes, a former Special Forces operative, started organizing cells on Earth and the remaining colonies. He had lost his brother in the Mars Base 7 attack, and revenge burned in his heart like fire. We can't fight them ship to ship, Luke told his growing network of rebels. They're too advanced, but we can make them pay for every human they take. Maria Santos, an intelligence analyst who had survived the Europa Station attack, became Luke's right hand. She had watched the Vorthak sort through her colleagues like they were selecting cattle. The image haunted her dreams and fueled her determination. I noticed something during the attack, Maria told Luke during one of their secret meetings. They seem to think our emotional attachments make us weak. When people tried to help their families or friends, the Vorthak looked confused, like they couldn't understand why someone would risk themselves for others. This observation became crucial intelligence. The resistance realized that the Vorthak fundamentally misunderstood human nature. They saw human compassion and loyalty as flaws to exploit, not strengths that could be turned against them. Luke's teams began developing new tactics. Instead of trying to match Vorthak technology, they focused on psychological warfare and asymmetric attacks. They studied every piece of captured alien equipment, looking for weaknesses. The breakthrough came when a resistance cell on Titan managed to rescue a small group of human prisoners from a Vorthak testing facility. The operation was led by Luke himself, along with a team that included Maria Santos and several other survivors who had personal scores to settle. The facility was a nightmare of sterile corridors and holding cells. Humans were kept in cage-like structures, many showing signs of repeated medical procedures. The rescued prisoners told horrifying stories of daily experiments designed to test pain tolerance, healing rates, and psychological breaking points. Among the rescued was Tony Martinez from the original New Dawn crew. He was barely recognizable, thin and scarred, but his eyes burned with a hatred that Luke recognized immediately. "They think they know us," Tony whispered as Luke helped him to safety. "They think they understand what makes us human. They're wrong." The rescued prisoners provided detailed intelligence about Vorthak facilities, security procedures, and most importantly, their psychology. The aliens were supremely confident in their superiority. They had never encountered serious resistance from their victims before. "They have a rigid hierarchy," explained Dr. Hayes, another New Dawn survivor who had been found in the facility. "Each alien has a specific role and rank. They don't adapt well when their plans are disrupted." Back on Earth, Admiral Stone and General Webb used this intelligence to plan humanity's response. They couldn't save the thousands who had already been taken, but they could ensure the Vorthak paid a price that would make them regret ever discovering humanity. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Stone told her senior staff. "We're fighting to send a message to the galaxy. Humans are not prey. Anyone who treats us like animals will learn what real predators look like. The rescued prisoners from Titan brought more than just intelligence. They brought something else that would prove far more dangerous to the Vorthak. They brought proof of what humans became when pushed beyond all limits. The torture had not broken them. Instead, it had forged them into something harder and more dangerous than they had ever been before. Luke Barnes looked at his growing army of survivors and volunteers. Each one had lost someone to the Vorthak. Each one carried scars, visible or invisible, from the alien attacks. They were no longer the peaceful explorers and miners they had once been. They were humanity's response to being treated like laboratory animals. And they were ready to show the Vorthak exactly what kind of mistake they had made. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the briefing room aboard the Earth defense ship Vengeance, his face scarred from his escape from Vorthak captivity. The room was packed with military officers, resistance fighters, and scientists. Everyone looked grim and determined. The time for defense was over. Now it was time to show the Vorthak what humanity really was. "Tell them what you saw, Jake," Admiral Stone said quietly. Jake's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he spoke. "They have processing centers on 12 different worlds, thousands of humans in each one. They're not just experimenting anymore. They're mass-producing biological weapons using human pain as the base component." The room fell silent. Dr. Helen Cross, who had been studying captured Vorthak technology, stood up. "We've reverse-engineered some of their equipment. The good news is that they're not as advanced as we thought. Their technology is superior, but it's specialized. They've never had to adapt it for real warfare." General Patrick Webb leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "They've conquered species before, but always through overwhelming technological superiority. They've never faced an enemy that could adapt their own technology and use it against them. They don't know how to fight a real war." Lisa Park, now wearing the uniform of her Earth defense engineer, activated a holographic display. "We've been busy while you were planning. Look at this." The display showed blueprints for new ships and weapons, but these weren't just human designs. They were combinations of human engineering and captured Vorthak technology, creating something entirely new. "We took their power systems and combined them with human weapons," Lisa explained. "We took their armor and redesigned it for human tactics. We took their biological scanners and turned them into targeting systems." Sam Mitchell, one of the engineers who had worked on the project, grinned darkly. "The best part is, we understand something they don't. Human creativity and adaptability. They build tools for specific purposes. We build tools that can be anything we need them to be." Rachel Kim, another engineer, pointed to a section of the blueprints. "This is my favorite part. We've created ammunition that uses their own biological weapons against them. Every shot carries a payload designed specifically to cause maximum damage to Vorthak physiology." Admiral Stone stood up. "Operation Hellstorm begins in 72 hours. Our primary target is the Vorthak Processing Center in the Kepler system. Intelligence suggests they have over 10,000 human prisoners there. The plan was unlike anything in human military history. Instead of trying to match the Vorthak ship for ship, humanity would use speed, unpredictability, and sheer viciousness. Every human ship would be equipped with nuclear self-destruct devices. Every boarding party would carry enough explosives to destroy whatever they were attacking. Commander Steve Phillips led the first wave. His ship, the Retribution, was smaller and faster than the Vorthak vessels. As they approached the alien processing center, Steve looked at his crew. These weren't professional soldiers. They were miners, engineers, colonists who had lost everything to the Vorthak. "Remember," Steve said over the communication system, "we're not here to capture anything. We're here to destroy everything." The battle began when the Retribution rammed directly into the side of a Vorthak mothership. Instead of trying to disable it, Steve's crew detonated nuclear charges that tore through the alien vessel's hull. Amy Baker, the demolitions expert, had placed the charges perfectly. The Vorthak ship broke apart in seconds, but Steve's crew wasn't done. Using emergency suits, they boarded the wreckage and began systematically destroying every piece of Vorthak technology they could find. When Vorthak warriors tried to stop them, they found themselves facing humans who fought with a savagery they had never encountered. Pete Johnson, the combat medic, had lost his family on Mars Base 7. When he encountered a group of Vorthak guards, he didn't try to wound or capture them. He used weapons designed to cause maximum pain and terror. The aliens, who had spent months studying human suffering, suddenly found themselves experiencing it firsthand. The Vorthak were shocked by human tactics. Their entire military doctrine was based on technological superiority and the assumption that inferior species would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They had never encountered an enemy that would ram ships into their vessels, or soldiers who would detonate explosives while still inside enemy ships. On the processing center's main station, Steve Phillips led a boarding party through corridors filled with human prisoners. What they found there would haunt them forever, but it also fueled a rage that made them unstoppable. Thousands of humans were kept in conditions worse than any animal. Many had been subjected to experiments that left them barely alive. Some had been used to test biological weapons. Others had been tortured simply to study their responses. Amy Baker found a room full of children who had been taken from Europa Station. They were thin, scared, and covered in small surgical scars. When she saw them, something broke inside her. From that moment, she stopped thinking of the Vorthak as enemies and started thinking of them as targets to be eliminated. No prisoners, she radioed to the other teams. No mercy, no exceptions. The human boarding parties moved through the station like a plague. They didn't just rescue prisoners. They destroyed everything: computer systems, research data, biological samples, weapons. Nothing was left intact. When the Vorthak tried to negotiate, offering to release prisoners in exchange for the humans withdrawing, they received a simple response from Admiral Stone. "You should have thought of that before you started torturing our people." The battle at Kepler was just the beginning. Over the next months, human fleets appeared throughout Vorthak space, always attacking, never defending. They targeted research stations, supply lines, and military bases with equal ferocity. Dubai. Vorthak leadership, including Nexus Prime, began to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that by studying human pain and fear, they could control and defeat humanity. Instead, they had created an enemy that was beyond their understanding. "They fight like they have nothing to lose," Nexus Prime reported to the Vorthak High Command. "They sacrifice their own ships and lives without hesitation. Their tactics make no sense according to our military doctrine." What the Vorthak didn't understand was that humans did have something to lose, and they had already lost it. The torture and experiments had destroyed human trust and compassion toward aliens. In its place was something much more dangerous: a species-wide determination that the Vorthak would pay for every human life they had taken. Captain Morrison, now commanding a fleet of converted human ships, looked out at the stars and knew that there was no going back. Humanity had been forced to become something they never wanted to be, but if that was the price of survival, they were willing to pay it. The Vorthak had wanted to study human nature. They were about to get a lesson they would never forget, assuming any of them lived through it. Admiral Catherine Stone stood on the bridge of the flagship Earth's Wrath, watching as the last Vorthak stronghold burned in the distance. Beside her, General Jake Morrison stared at the destruction with cold satisfaction. 3 years had passed since the Vorthak had first tortured his crew. Now their entire civilization was nothing but ash and memories. "Nexus Prime is requesting to speak with you," reported Communications Officer Beth Williams. Catherine's face showed no emotion. "Put him through." The main screen flickered, showing the alien leader that had once seemed so confident and superior. Now Nexus Prime looked desperate, his blue skin pale and his large black eyes filled with something humans knew well: fear. "Admiral Stone," the alien's voice cracked, "we surrender, completely and unconditionally. We offer you all our technology, all our resources, all our knowledge. Please, just stop the killing." Catherine looked at the alien for a long moment. Around the bridge, her crew waited silently. These were people who had lost friends, family, entire worlds to Vorthak experiments. Danny Foster, now her security chief, had watched his colony disappear. Maria Santos, her intelligence officer, had survived Europa Station. Tony Martinez, scarred but unbroken, served as her tactical advisor. "You offer us what you stole from our people?" Catherine asked quietly. "You offer us mercy after showing none?" "We made a mistake," Nexus Prime pleaded. "We underestimated your species. We thought you were weak because you showed compassion. We were wrong." Jake Morrison stepped forward. "You didn't just underestimate us, you tortured children. You turned human suffering into weapons. You treated our people like animals in your laboratories." "We can make amends," the alien insisted. "We can bring back those who died, clone them. From genetic samples, we can undo the damage." The bridge fell completely silent. Catherine felt the eyes of her crew on her. She thought about all the humans who had died in Vorthak experiments, all the families torn apart, all the colonies emptied. She thought about the children Amy Baker had found in that processing center, and the broken survivors they had rescued. "Too late." "No," Catherine said simply. "There are some things that cannot be undone, some prices that cannot be repaid." She cut the transmission and turned to her weapons officer. "Target their remaining ships. All of them." "Admiral," came a voice from behind her. It was Dr. Helen Cross, now serving as the fleet's science advisor. "If we destroy them completely, we become no better than they were." Catherine turned to face her. "Dr. Cross, do you remember what you found in their research files? The genetic modifications they were developing? The biological weapons designed specifically to target human children?" Helen's face went pale. She had indeed found those files, and they had haunted her dreams ever since. "They weren't just torturing us for information," Catherine continued. "They were planning to turn every human into a test subject, every man, woman, and child on Earth and every colony. They were going to make torture a science and suffering an art form." She turned back to the screen showing the burning Vorthak homeworld. "I won't take the risk that some of them might survive and start over somewhere else. The galaxy needs to know what happens when you treat humans like laboratory animals." The final battle was swift and merciless. Captain Roy Davis led the bomber squadrons that destroyed the last Vorthak fleet. Commander Kelly Brooks, whose Ghost Squadron had become legendary throughout human space, personally eliminated the command ships that tried to escape. On the Imrain ground, troops led by the battle-scarred Danny Foster swept through the remaining Vorthak cities. They found more evidence of what the aliens had planned. Massive facilities designed to process millions of humans, genetic laboratories filled with human DNA samples, and worst of all, prototype weapons that would have made the torture they had already inflicted seem mild by comparison. Pete Johnson, the former medic who had become one of humanity's most effective interrogators, extracted information from captured Vorthak scientists. What he learned made even hardened soldiers sick. The aliens had been planning to modify human genetics to make people more sensitive to pain, to create a slave race that could be controlled through suffering. "They weren't just going to kill us," Pete reported to Admiral Stone. "They were going to make us into something that couldn't exist without pain. Living torture devices." The revelation ended any remaining debate about mercy. Even the most compassionate humans agreed that the Vorthak had forfeited any right to exist. As the last Vorthak city fell, Admiral Stone received reports from across their former empire. Human fleets had systematically destroyed every Vorthak world, every research station, every ship. Not a single alien had been allowed to escape. The species that had turned torture into science had been completely eliminated. But victory came with a price. Humanity had changed. The curious, optimistic species that had first reached for the stars was gone. In its place was something harder, colder, more ruthless. The torture had not broken human spirit, but it had transformed it into something alien. Species across the galaxy would learn to fear. Admiral Stone stood with General Morrison on the observation deck of their flagship, looking out at the stars. Around them, the greatest military force in human history was disbanding, its purpose complete. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we go home," Catherine replied, "and we make sure this never happens again." But both of them knew it wasn't that simple. Word of humanity's response to the Vorthak was already spreading across the galaxy. Other alien civilizations were receiving detailed reports of how humans had responded to torture and experimentation. The message was clear and terrifying. Humans might appear peaceful, but when pushed beyond all limits, they became something that could erase entire species from existence. On distant worlds, alien leaders looked at their own research programs and military doctrines with new eyes. Species that had been planning their own contact with humanity quietly changed their plans. The galaxy had learned a lesson written in the ashes of the Vorthak Empire. Humans were not prey, and those who treated them as such would face extinction. Dr. Cross approached the observation window carrying a report pad. "Admiral, I've finished analyzing the data from their homeworld. They had contact with 17 other species. All of them treated the same way they treated us." "Where are those species now?" Catherine asked. "Gone. Extinct. The Vorthak had been doing this for thousands of years. We're the first species to survive their experiments and fight back." Catherine felt a chill. Humanity had not just avenged their own people. They had avenged countless other species that had been tortured and destroyed by Vorthak cruelty. As their ships began the long journey home, the human crews carried with them the knowledge of what they had become. They were no longer the innocent explorers who had first encountered the Vorthak. They were the species that had turned the galaxy's most efficient torturers into a cautionary tale. The stars seemed different now, colder and more dangerous. But they also seemed safer, because every alien civilization out there now knew the price of underestimating human nature when survival was at stake. Humanity had won, but in doing so, they had lost something they could never get back: their innocence. The question now was whether the galaxy was safer or more dangerous with humans as its newest apex predator.